Well, welcome once again to ARTbreak, everyone. Well, a couple of weeks ago here at the KIA, we were celebrating the Day of the Dead, and hopefully, among other things, events here, you had a chance to hear Margaret Vega's ARTbreak talk about creating an ofrenda for her late father at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. And I think the fact that events like the Day of the Dead, which were traditionally a Hispanic family celebration, the fact that they have in a way gone mainstream and now part of public events suggests that we have kind of developing a different attitude toward death than we had previously. And along with that goes other developments such as the death positive movement, you may have heard of, which is an attempt to kind of take a second look at how we view death and not seeing it as this sort of taboo, morbid subject that we all try to avoid, but instead find ways of coming to terms with it in a way that we reflect on it as a significant part of life. Well, our guest today, Brent Harris, I think is probably best known to many of you as a sculptor and as the head of the KIA's sculpture program. But he is also very involved with the death positive movement at many different levels, and particularly involved with discovering ways which art and the creative and imaginative can be part of that in dealing with loss. Brent's previous life experiences, I think, inform not only his art, but also his attitude for this. When he entered Western Michigan University, he began as a psychology major, which he did for a couple of years before he then switched to art. And I think this idea of the philosophical, the psychological, the spiritual are very much a part of what he does. And then after college, he worked as a paramedic as a way of helping people, which brought him in contact with suffering on a very first-hand basis. So I think with all these things in mind, he really brings unique insights and I think a real depth of understanding to this difficult question that we all are delighted to have with us today. So please welcome Brent Harris.
Thank you for that introduction. That was really thoughtful. I'm going to breeze through this here. Hopefully I'll save enough time for questions from y'all. And then I might have a few questions for you as well. So be prepared for that. So, looking back on the moment where I began this journey is a complicated one. The threads of a lifetime cross and weave over one another. Yeah, thanks. All right. One thing I do remember is being drawn to sitting with trauma. When I was a kid, maybe 12 years old, I remember a winter morning out delivering newspapers when I saw a car slide off a road and into a ditch. I ran to the car, and in the driver's seat, there was an older woman who was, as I look back on it, probably suffering from a heart attack. She was obviously dying. A bystander went to call for help, and I stayed with her until the ambulance came. I remember the feeling of knowing that she was dying. She was ashen and her breathing was shallow, but I felt calm being alongside of her. I felt then it was important that she not be alone. Years later, after graduating from college, I was driving down the road at night and I came upon another accident. A car had run a stop sign, crashing into an embankment. The driver was critically injured, barely conscious, unable to speak from the severe facial wounds. I ran to get help and then came back and I stayed with him until the ambulance arrived again. And again, there was that feeling of serenity holding his body and his bloody hand until help arrived. I saw this was a calling. And the next time I wanted to do more, to go farther. And shortly after, I trained in emergency medicine. I worked as a paramedic for quite a few years. Tending people in the most vulnerable moments of their lives gave me a profound and deep understanding of our vulnerability, how quickly life can change at any given moment, and really how our stories change. I saw a lot of death, but in a way I felt that bearing witness to these moments was a gift. But there was a point later in my career when things began to shift. In particular, there was a call to a potential cardiac arrest. We arrived, lights and sirens, and went up the steps with our bags, our drugs, and equipment. It was an old home on the east side, and an old man had lived there, obviously for a long time, maybe a lifetime. The man was on his carpeted floor, his family distraught and had no idea what to do. Our daughter insisted that he had to do not resuscitate, but without the legal paperwork, we were bound by law to do everything we could. So they continued CPR. I could hear his brittle ribs cracking under the firefighter's hands. I remember taking in the room, the smell of the photos on the walls, and wondering who they were. What did they mean to this man whose head I held between my knees while forcing in a tracheal tube past his vocal cords? We forced oxygen into his lungs and gave him enough drugs to bring pulses to a stone. And all the while, I was filled with resentment. We should be sitting in that parking lot we were in 10 minutes ago, reading books and listening to NPR. The old man should have passed away gently in his favorite chair, surrounded by his children. But here we were, in bloody gauze and strangers and orchestrated chaos. And to make matters worse, my partner announced with the excitement of a new trainee that he had pulses. I cursed under my breath, or maybe aloud actually. Told the firefighters to get their backboards, and we strapped the old man down, bags of medication flowing into his arms, keeping him alive while still forcing air into his lungs. I told the family to follow us to the hospital, and I knew in my heart that he was going to die shortly, after either in the emergency room or in an intensive care room, and the family would be hit with thousands of dollars in medical bills. And he would die alone in a sterile room, away from his home. And the family would not be allowed ceremony or time with the body in a sacred space. And I knew that I never wanted to do that again. Oops. I think these are a little out of order, so be patient. At the time, I didn't have words for it, but I knew there had to be a better way. And now, along with many others, I'm on the road to what feels like a better way. As much as we try to resist, endings happen in every moment. The end of a breath, the end of a day, the end of a relationship, and ultimately the end of life. And in each of these endings, there is a beginning, but we do not always know what that will look like. We live in a time of death, a time of extinctions, pandemics, climate crises, and the upturning of social orders. But in that turmoil also lie new beginnings and new opportunities. When we learn how to befriend death, we develop resiliency, and we find new ways to navigate our next steps, our next breath, and our next relationship with the world. It's important to realize that life-death is a situation of relationship. When we can live our lives openly and honestly, transparently, seeing the natural state of the world as it truly is, and not from where we need it to be, where ego needs it to be. It helps us to understand that death is not in opposition to life, but inseparable from the life force. Death folds into life, and life emerges from death. The death positive movement in America evolved alongside the sex positivity movement. So it's no surprise that at its core, it's feminist and an act of resistance, acknowledging bodily autonomy and community over medicalized patriarchal practices. Other radical cultural movements had major influences in the way that we were forced to deal with death openly. During the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, gay men's love and suffering made life, death, and politics real in a way that become undeniable to the broader public. Because of this tragedy, end-of-life conversations and nascent hospice care practice became part of our public conversation. The Chicano movement of the 1970s rose up resisting cultural assimilation and fighting for workers' rights and cultural autonomy. From the Dia de Muertos, the Day of the Dead, was brought from family traditions to public celebrations as a way to celebrate Chicano heritage. And today we're seeing more and more end-of-life care facilitators, end-of-life doulas, birth doulas, in completing the life-death circle. While both locations are still mostly operating outside the corporate health structure, it is in my opinion that this is for the best. A major player in the modern death movement is an organization founded by mortician Caitlin Doherty called the Order of the Good Death. They believe, and this is from their 7 tenets of the good death, that by hiding death and dying behind closed doors, we do more harm than good to our society. And that a culture of silence around death should be broken through discussion, gatherings, art, innovation, and scholarship. This organization has been a valuable resource and advocate for death-aware acts of cultural change and reclamation, such as death cafes, home funerals, and green burials, and body composting, even, to name a few. Around 2016, some like-minded folks and I started doing some death work locally, where we worked on acquiring green burial space and starting monthly death cafe meetings. The organization I co-founded, Daylight and Darkness, goes beyond the open format of death cafes and encourages deeper prompted conversations, art-centered grief and death work, book clubs, and even movie nights. Here is a picture of one of the things we did at some of the Daylight and Darkness meetings. The idea in my mind was prompted from, I think it was probably common for a lot of people, common to my family. When my grandparents passed, the matriarch, the patriarch passed, the sisters, there was a lot of conflict and the family broke apart, right? The stories changed and their expectations changed. There's a lot of infighting. So what I wanted to do was find a way that we can all tell our stories, right? Realize that we're all people with our own separate stories. So what we did was get the rope machine that we started using during EFA, where people string together. Well, I'll show you. Well, first, we had them write a story. Okay, the prompts are always different. In this case, it's like what we want from life, what we want to expect from death. It could be an honoring of a family member who passed. Okay, and so you write those on strips of scrap fabric. And then we take this rope machine, you see it in the front has some gears, and on the back, there's some hooks. And we would take yarn, skeins of yarn, and we'd have people go back and forth with different colored yarn, which is wonderful because the idea is when you're doing it, there's a lot of interaction. Your bodies are moving together, you're ducking under people, getting under people's arms. So your bodies are in conversation with each other, right? So part of the dying act, the grieving act, I should say, to me, it's really important to involve the body, right? We could think our way through things, but the body, what they say, keeps the score, right? That's what they're saying now. The body remembers. So I think somatically involving the body during grief is really important, especially when you do it with family. We do it with family members, other people who are also in grief, to realize we're not alone. So anyway, so they go through this act of weaving this together. The rope gets tied together and the stories get tied together as well. And so metaphorically, the idea of tying our stories together, and then the rope gets cut up and everyone gets to take a little piece home with them. So. This is another example of an urn that I'd made for a friend, a client whose father had passed. He was a hunter. And making the urn, I had them help do the design and as much physical work as they were able to. Okay. And again, I want the people to be involved with the project, get their bodies involved so the bodies can remember the grief in the process. So oftentimes when people die and we show up, there's that, what can I do? What can I do? Right? And I think finding things to do, because your body knows it wants to do something, it wants to move forward, it wants to involve itself, get beyond the words. So if we can do that as much as possible, I like to find ways to do that. Jennifer Townsend, who's my partner in the Daylight and Darkness organization, her mother passed. And this is the funeral home, and I was taking a hand casting. of her to remember, so she can continue to hold her mom's hand and see what she was like, remember what she was like. I teach classes, and as you heard, I had the sculpture department here. This last year, I began teaching a class on making memento mori. And for those who don't know, memento mori is a Latin phrase meaning remember that you will die. Legend has it that when the emperors would be coming back from a victory, they'd be on their chariots, and in the back of the chariot, they would have a slave whispering in their ear as all the accolades were the flowers being dropped upon them. Remember, you will die. Right? Keeps them humble, keeps remembering why they're here. And also for us, it's remembering that you will die, so today you have to live. Okay. Memento moris are an object that you keep that can be a coin. We make quite a few things, and the idea is having those reminders on a daily basis, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, what society, the structures, the rhythms of this society. And we kind of forget where we are in that. So those are nice little reminders that time is not eternal for us. It could be tomorrow, it could be 10 minutes from now, it could be 20 years from now. And it is a common theme in art. Oftentimes you'll see paintings of dancing skeletons, maybe table settings with a skull and some rotting, wilting flowers, rotting fruit, that sort of thing. In my class, we learned about ceremonial death. We learned about art across cultures. We did a lot of space. We created a lot of space for each other, sharing personal stories of death and grief. And we made the memento moris. So for example, in this picture, you can see we had a candle we would light before class with an intention. We blow it out afterwards with intention. Fresh flowers at the beginning of class, and we'd, at the end of class, this is how they would end up. Here's Krista holding one of her death masks. Death masks were, I think, the 18th century, I want to say, when people would, if they want to memorialize in a painting or a sculpture of a poet who had passed away, sometimes they could make a death mask that could have a physical reference. And there are also sort of things depending on different cultures, you can make a mask of the person and put them on a ceremonial grave after the fact, after they passed on. My idea with this class and other classes I've taught before when I did mask making was to use the process of making the mask to be a part of the overall idea. What we do is we paint silicone on the person, and then we put mother mold over top of it, a plaster. And it takes a while. It takes like 15 minutes for that to cure, okay? So when you're under there, it's heavy, right? You can barely hear it. Everything's kind of muted. You can't see, you can't speak, you're mobilized. So sometimes we do a little bit lighter, but if we really wanted to get into the ceremony of it, what we would do is, I did this for a class on shadow work. So the idea is when you're under the mask, you would think about aspects of yourself that you wanted to let go, right? Think of your own death, maybe. Okay, what it's like to be there at your own funeral, to be in the coffin with the people around you. And with the shadow work, the idea is when the piece is done, you would, on the interior, paint or sculpt aspects of your shadow, parts of that you don't tell other people, parts of yourself that maybe you don't even tell yourself, okay, the parts of us that we hide. And the external part would be the part that we show everyone else. And while you're under the mask, when it's being made, it's really part of the ritual to really go into that space, go into that underworld, be like Persephone down there, sort of hunting the unconscious, okay, rooting around in your ideas of yourself. Another aspect of that is the person who's putting it on. I try to have other students do the application. And so the idea is we have a caregiver and we have the person who's being attuned, and the caregiver is literally responsible for the breath, right? Because you have to keep those air holes, those nostril holes open. So there's a responsibility for us, the living, to the dead. So anyway, so that's what the mask projects are all about. And Krista, I know she can attest to that, but she was very eerie, laying in there, hearing everybody moving around her, talking, hearing the music, but not being able to communicate. And it was a pretty profound experience, it sounds like. Is Paula with hers? The class is pretty open, so I think whatever medium people were comfortable with, we encouraged. So Anna did some exploration of a piece with climate grief. Was this one? These pieces are some things I came up with. I call them funereal stones. And what they are basically simple closed pinch pots. And what we do is have the maker kind of press their thumb into a little dent on top of your thumbprint. So they can be for yourself, that'd be memento mori. So eventually knowing that your ashes will be put inside them, you kind of keep a little hole that can be sealed with wax, right? So, and then those who are living on or have lived on can hold this piece that you made and feel where your thumb was. And so there's that connection between the living and the dead. And you can make them for people who are in hospice, who are ready to pass, and maybe have them hold it as well if you want as a memento for them. So there's lots of applications, lots of ways we work with those. And if you want to kind of go beyond that, on Ale again, made this one in the upper left-hand corner, make a little salt shaker for your ashes. So we got pretty creative with them. So, as I discussed earlier, death awareness is important. Not only in how we approach our loved ones' final moments, it's integral to understanding how we move through the smaller deaths we face every day. All of our life changes involve life-death cycles. Embracing a new gender identity, a new job, a divorce, bankruptcy, these all break us down. And unfortunately, in our culture, it's difficult to find space to move through these moments consciously and with intention. In Tibetan Buddhism, the bardo is used to describe the liminal space one's spirit occupies between death and reincarnation. It's a space of choice. In its metaphorical context, the bardo is a space where life as we know it becomes suspended, an opportunity for spiritual progress or soul work can occur. Entry into the life of the soul, a life of passion and service, demands a deep price, a psychological form of dying. We don't easily give up on our understanding of life, which is often a faint idea of a life of extended adolescence. Nature-based societies understand this, traditionally providing persons with extensive preparation for their encounters with the soul, followed by an arduous initiation rite. And these rites, these rituals, facilitate a shift in consciousness that is required to turn our focus from concerns to the day-to-day and cross the threshold to those of the soul. This past summer, I was participating in a rites of passage ceremony. For myself, the retreat was to facilitate my life stage into elderhood. Yeah, I think I got the adulthood one nailed a little while ago. So I'm gonna be an old man now. So we spent a week in daily ceremony, each of us holding our separate intentions as we talked, cried, and sang them into being. We listened with open hearts to the whispers of nature, earth, and animal and ancestral. And what followed that week of work was a solo 4-day vision fast into the mountains. With only water, a tarp, a sleeping bag, and a few personal items and totems, I walked a spirit on the land, listening and watching the world around and within me with new eyes. On the third day, I prepared for what is called the Death Lodge. Of the many ceremonies I prepared for, this is the one that I feared the most. I knew that I'd be weak and hungry, and who knows what else up there in the mountains. And that evening, I was to prepare for my symbolic death. And for as much work as I've done in the service of death and ceremony and ego loss, after divorce and bankruptcy and loss and therapy and sweat lodges, health scares, I was terrified. I really was. Was I willing to face whatever came up, review my life, and really let go? What if I opened up something that I couldn't handle? I was alone out there. And yes, I understand that was the point. To face my past, weak, vulnerable, and alone, with only myself to answer and walk through the threshold unburdened. Because in the end, that's the walk that we all take. So that evening, I walked to the spot I had chosen the day before. I climbed the ridge to the base of the elder tree, an ancient jack pine whose broad trunk was scarred from fire, its desiccated top and limbs home to burrowed birds. Thunder was coming from the east, and the sky started to brighten from the lightning. I placed fallen pine limbs on the ground in a sketch of a coffin, placed items from my pack around the outside, object representing my family, friends, here and friends gone, ancestors, mine and the peoples whose land I stood. And I called to them all to witness my death, to offer guidance. I cried a list of parts of myself that were ready to die, and some parts carried from childhood trauma, some protective and some not, but they no longer serve me. I gave thanks to those who were there to witness and those who accompanied me on my life journey, and I begged forgiveness to those I had hurt or wronged, and I was emptied and ready. And then I stepped naked and laid on the stones in the makeshift coffin. I won't get into here what came in those moments, but the storm was here. I broke apart my shelter. I packed my totems, and I walked back to the windy dark to my sight. A little spatially disoriented, but keenly alert to the fact that I was not the same person that had walked into that sacred space an hour before. So this aspect of ceremony was a journey to the underworld, like many described in stories and myths throughout time. These rituals open us to the cyclical natures of life, death, and help us facilitate a way to enter and navigate these processes in ways that modern society and its systems simply are not built for. I believe that these rituals and ceremonies, as well as time spent in nature, are deeply important aspects of death work, of teaching, of art, and of relationships. They connect us in community to ancestral knowledge and to our place in the wheel of life. They've been with us for generations, and with time and practice, I believe that we can return to them. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions or conversation, yeah.
Look, you mentioned having your own ceremonies and that. I wonder, is it even legal to just bury someone in your backyard?
It depends on what state you're in and how much property you have.
How about the state we're in here?
I think that's a pretty complicated one. I know I've been in conversation with it. It's really difficult with like easements and water, and it's really complicated. I think it's a county by county situation. But I know it is possible in some areas, but I wouldn't be able to give you the legalese to tell you exactly what the parameters that would be.
Part of why I bring that up, it seems to me, kind of been cogitating on this for a while, how wonderful it is when you go to certain countries and some southern states, that everywhere you go, there are like family cemeteries that go back centuries.
Yeah.
Or like little communities, but pretty much everyone's got, Aunt Hattie and great grandma back there somewhere in the back 40, and there's a little place that's allotted for them, and maybe they'll be with the old grapevines or something, or the old apple tree that no one's tending anymore. And there's something really thoughtful and elegant about it, but it's also has this hidden dimension that if there are family plots everywhere, you can't really easily build Walmarts on that either. And how wonderful a way that would be to protect one's environment by simply everyone burying their relatives there, making it known that they're there, that they can never touch that.
Yeah. I think that's part of the green burial movement too, is getting some spots that are declared religious property to prevent that as well, right? Yes.
I am fascinated by the fact that you started out saying you have questions for us. I want to get right to it.
Cool. What would be a good, if you could visualize your death, what would be a good death for you?
I think the way it's happening more now.
I'm sorry, the question was, what questions do I have?
Should I answer? Or
Please, no, yeah.
Are we thinking? Are we cogitating?
I'd like you to answer.
The home I love with the people I love.
The home you love with the people you love.
No pain.
No pain.
Kindness, flowers, pretty things, color, things I loved in life.
Yeah. It's not a bad way to live in general, right?
All the senses, you know, smells, beautiful music.
Mm.
Maybe just a ice cube on your tongue, you know, you can kind of remember what it was like to be in this.
Thank you. Yes.
Surrounded by trees.
Surrounded by trees.
Ideally, that's all them.
Alone, or anybody with you, or
Keep the closest people.
closest people? Yes.
So this is a pretty serious topic, and you're presenting it in a new light. But there must be joy and happiness with this also for you and the other people that we work with.
Yeah, so it's a pretty heavy topic, but there's also joy and happiness in it. Yes, indeed. Yeah, there's. Yeah, I find joy and comfort in being around these sort of conversations. I think there's something, for myself, I think there's sort of accumulated difficulty in sort of like moving along on this sort of like path of like really not acknowledging really deep feelings. It gets to a certain point, you really just, you get older, you just want to be real. You want to be in connection and community. It just feels there's a release in that. So, and happiness and joy and flowers and sensate, that sensate world. It's really beautiful. Acknowledging the importance of that. Yes.
Oh, I was curious we talk about death and about funerals. I have a question. When you think about the death funerals in Ghana, the celebratory, we're not going to cry during the funeral, but instead we make it a party. I'm just curious about what you think about West African traditions in terms of death and funerals.
I'm not a West African death scholar, but I do know a little bit about it. And there's a lot of joy and ritual and ceremony. And I think, from what I understand, in West African tradition, there is a lot of nature-based understanding. There's very little difference between the two. And there's I think a lot of the death understanding is celebrated in rituals, honestly. Even I was reading the other day about fermentation culture, right? We were like some of the original mixologists and beer creators. And there's the idea of like creating these things in the home, fermenting. There's like the idea of like, so there's a lot of, and a lot of the fermentation drinks were given to the ancestors, the people who were recently dead as well. So yeah, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I think Krista up there, I saw her mask was painted those bright colors because she talked about she wanted her death to be like a party. So yeah. Yes.
I believe while we're at Osterville Cemetery, they have what's called green burial. Is it green? Yeah, it's called green. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, green burials are, I'm not sure, they're kind of coming fast and furious. Some of them are connected to local funeral homes, who I think some of them are starting to make the transition to make burials that don't require embalming, caskets, the sarcophagus or the concrete sort of like, bunker that they have to be buried in. So you can be buried in a shroud. So green burials are becoming more and more common, and we've been advocating for them locally for a while now. I think there was also some in Grand Rapids as well. Yes.
I guess I'm just curious, doing this work, is there something you found having all these conversations with people and investigating your own experiences particularly surprises you? Like you go into these spaces to have these conversations, and I'm sure you have some expectations around what that's going to look like. Have you noticed anything in general, or maybe a specific moment that surprised you and like opening up this conversation with people?
And the question is, in this death work, has anything kind of surprised me? Anything that I've opened up that? Yeah, it surprises me the depth to which people want to engage in these conversations, how long people sit around afterwards and keep talking. So that surprised me. I mean, I thought I was just sort of like a little weirdo on the outskirts, or be around a couple of weirdos, but it's everybody, people I wouldn't expect, it's on, and I think, and this is just me, just postulating up here, I think there is a wrapping around of, I think some of the people who are older obviously have been thinking about it more. You start seeing our friends die, our families start to go, and become aware of our own fallibility and vulnerability. But I think the younger people also, I think with the climate crisis and with so many things sort of up in the air, I think there's a lot of grief that's starting to connect us all in ways. And I think that's been a surprise and something I've been noticing. Yes.
So when you raise the question of envisioning our own death, a part of me pushes back against that, because I might just collapse in a moment of a heart attack. I might die in my sleep. I might have a long, miserable illness with a lot of suffering and pain. I might have a pretty mellow illness with my loved ones around me and the music and the flowers. And, I mean, you can't. That's all life is. You can't really control that. So sure, we can all have like an ideal of how we would kind of like it to be, but for a lot of us, it's not going to be that way.
No, it's true. The final moments we really don't have any control over, that's for sure. But I think in the question, how do you envision your death? I think part of it is really about how do you envision your life, right? You don't have any control of the death, but when you envision like how you want to die, really it's a reflection of how you want your life to be. And then what are you doing to make that happen? You can't control your death, but you can control everything up to a certain point. So I think that's some of the investigation that's interesting. Yes.
So I was just curious. I know you spoke a lot about like the bodily experience of like grief and dying and death, and I was curious, like as you've experienced like the death positive movement, how has it shifted the way that you use or relate to the material in your own artistic practice?
Okay, so the question is, with this death work, how has that affected my use of material in my own artistic work? I don't think it's a coincidence, but I think I've started using more natural materials. Yeah, I've really kind of moved away from like some of the industrial processes and really tried to get back to the basics of what, kind of burning away all the essence of what I need to do to get a story told. I think I'm going more into the narrative for sure than like trying to put something on the wall that's going to get people to say neat things about my work and like, isn't it great? I like the process more. I like communication and storytelling. And then I think, so when it comes to materials, whatever material tells the story best, I've really enjoyed that. So sometimes it might be ceramic, it might be steel, it might be a mix. So I think every story should have its own dialect and its own, whatever it needs. And I think investigating that has been my interest. Yes.
Can you say more about the group you talked about, Daylight and Darkness? Is that ongoing or is that just once?
Yeah, so we're getting the band back. Oh, so the question is like Daylight and Darkness, is that still ongoing? And so the answer is we're getting the band back together. I've been in connection with Jennifer Townsend, and she's studying thanatology up at Western, and she's in Lee's Honors College, so she also teaches classes in death and dying. Debbie Eisenbeiss, who is a deaf doula. She's been a deaf doula for a while now and a pastor. I just started my deaf doula training this last week, so I'm hoping to be certified in December, so I'm looking forward to that. End of life doula, I should say. That's how I prefer to be called.
Where are you studying?
It's the Dying Years, the organization. They're from Ann Arbor, but it's an online course. Anyway, so the Daylight and Darkness. We were having the workshops, doing everything for about a year, maybe a little bit longer. And then I just was really excited. I wish you all could have been there. We were planning a big festival, right? End of life festival, where it was going to be at Old Dog Tavern, right? We had poets lined up. We had bands playing, like Carolyn Keeble doing like drums because she has worked in hospice, transitioning people with music. We had a folk band who was going to play like Appalachian murder ballads. We had space for testimonials or people to go up and talk about their dead, they're dead and dying and their loved ones. We had an altar, that people could like add to, so like build this altar up over time and print out photos of their loved ones from their cell phones. It's this whole event. And it was scheduled for April 1st, 2020. So, yeah. So we had a few Zoom meetings, but that kind of fizzled out. So anyway, I've been in conversation with everyone, so we're going to start doing some more programming by the beginning of 2024, and hopefully bring that festival back. So, yes.
Yeah, Brent, I'm just curious. I've been in the medical field for 30 years. In this particular field, you said you get a certificate. I'm interested in the training, the certification. Is there some place that they register? Do they advertise? Is there a charging fee, et cetera, for your whole program?
Yeah, there's definitely a fee for the program. Sorry, the question was the certification. How are we certified? How are we announce ourselves?
Yeah, is it regulated?
Is it regulated?
Certification?
Yeah, there is certification. There's a national registry. And so when you can become an end-of-life doula and be uncertified and still practice. It's not a hands-on. We're not administering medicine. There's no pay. We can't lift a patient from a bed to a wheelchair in a Hoyer or anything like that. So it's hands-on only since you can brush someone's hair, or you can hold their hand. So we're not doing medicine, and it's not therapy. It's really just sort of being there, during. So we train in end-of-life circumstances, what we expect from the body, cross-culturally, some different sort of like end-of-life sort of like cultural traditions, and tending to a lot of the things that come up emotionally, spiritually, within the family. Anyway, so, and there is an end-of-life, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they do, like I said, there's a national certification board. Yeah. For those who go through the right amount of training and do the right hours. Yes.
You mentioned that we didn't get the exact name, but it was something like the Order of a Good Death, something like that. Is that a program, or is that another like daylight darkness thing, or what exactly?
Yeah. So the question is, what is the Order of the Good Death? And the Order of the Good Death has been around for quite a while. There, Caitlin Doty is she's a mortician, and she's got a YouTube channel that's still active, and tons of YouTube videos all about death positivity. So they're really just sort of a hub for a lot of different ideas for people, a lot of information gathering. If that's a place you want to go to get a lot of information about these sort of things. And their website is really deep and informative. And she's funny. Yeah, she's really cool. Yes.
In addition to that, is there like a newsletter, or do you have a website?
No, I don't have a website currently for this now, but to be continued. Yes.
Okay, I'm curious about people who choose to leave their body to science, medical school or something. And I ask this because I have a friend whose husband did this, and it's through our local medical school, Stryker, and she said they were very sensitive and, at end of life. And I don't know if you've had any experience with that or any comment about that.
Comment about leaving your body to science?
Yeah, or, if you've spoken to anyone who's done that and how it all works. And
I personally don't know anyone who's done it. I know a couple people who that's their intention of doing it. I know they take less cadavers than they used to. I think with medical schools, I think with digitally, there's so much they can get online, virtually, but they don't really need cadavers in the same sort of way maybe they used to. But obviously organ donation, even if you don't want to leave your entire body, organ donation is always welcome and encouraged. So, if you don't have that on your driver's license, please do.
She seemed to have a very positive experience of this. They were very sensitive and caring and almost spiritual about the whole thing.
Wow. And she went through Stryker. Is
I
that?
believe so.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that. I'll look into that. That sounds really interesting. Cool.
Are your classes available to anybody, any level?
The art classes?
Yes.
Oh yeah, anybody, any level. Yeah, you don't. I've had some people who they're not artists at all. If you're a writer, you want to come in, you want to just be there, be a part of the conversation. So, yeah, there's access points for everybody.
And it's open now for sign up.
Open now for sign up. Winter semester. Yeah, it's been a spring and summer course before. This one's gonna be the winter course, so it's gonna be a lot longer. So that'll be really good for us. Okay, how about? I was reading on this. I was reflecting on this morning. What a bad death. What does a bad death look like for you? Maybe just take a few minutes and think about maybe the worst possible death for you. Yes.
I have a friend right now who is dying at home with hospice, and it just goes on. And his family, is there, making him comfortable, doing whatever, and it's awful. It's awful for them. It reminded me of the first instance where the man was, beyond help. I just think this is awful for them, for all concerned. I don't know what to do to try to make them feel any better.
Yeah, it's never easy. Yes.
Along those lines, I think a bad death would be when the body's trying to die and everybody's doing everything to keep it from dying.
When the body's trying to die and everybody keeps trying to keep it from dying. Oh, yeah.
That can't happen by applying extreme measures, rather than just recognize the body's trying to die. Family was just flown in from California and not been involved with mom for 50 years, trying to keep mom alive.
Right. And who was that for?
Who's it for?
Right. And sometimes these questions are really good homework for us to do. So when we get to that point, investigate, what is this for? Who is this for all of us? Because I don't think we really get to ask those questions until those final moments, and then we just sort of step in ways that are unconscious. And yes.
I guess I think of a bad death in a political sense, so I would think of war or ethnic cleansing or murder specifically. I guess I think of bad death in those kind of terms where it's I didn't ask for that, the circumstances just came upon me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
My sister was raped and stabbed and then set on fire. She was taken to an doula, and all this was done to her. And I think that had to be the worst death. Full of fear, and then she was still alive when she was set on fire. So that you have all that, and then because she was set on fire, of course, it took us probably six weeks before they could even identify the body. They identified it by the teeth, of course. But so that was, so she was just fear and alone, and I just think that had to be the most horrific death ever, and like I said, we knew she was missing, but we had no idea where she was, and they didn't put two and two together until about 6 weeks after her death. So horrific. Yeah, that to me is a terrible death.
Yeah, it's horrific. Can I ask what her name was?
Deborah Stone.
Bristow. I'm sorry. And I think that's a common one, is dying alone, right? Which reinforces our need for community to be in spaces like this, the importance of that. Yes, ma'am.
Are you working at all for assisted suicide? I looked at what he did, but more than allows.
Oh man, yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard much in the way I think coworking kind of scared a lot of people in Michigan away from that, assisted suicide. I would like to hear more about it, but yeah, I haven't heard anything, unless anyone here has. Yeah, unfortunately, our hands get pretty tied once we enter the system, the medical system. We're kind of on their terms, which is part of why I think someone had asked me what my like end of life plan is, and honestly, it's community. It's being around people who can sort of like take me to appointments, and I can take them to appointments, and sort of like being there for each other to stay out of the system as much as possible, keep ourselves healthy and cared for. And home funerals are, I think, with not the advent, but like kind of the reintroduction of home funerals. There's a few people in town who are trained in home funerals. You still have to coordinate with funeral homes with those, but it's something that can be done. And so when you start thinking about the idea of how to take care of a body after their death, we can also start thinking about how to take care of each other before that event as well. I think you saw those pictures we showed of the home funerals, and part of those was, she knew that woman in particular who was buried with the flowers. She was in the casket with the flowers around her. She was around a lot of people who cared for her and were able to sort of like do a lot of the work at home, so she didn't have to enter a facility. So, yes.
I think that one of the things that you mentioned about your EMT experience, where there was a do not resuscitate, is really important for people to know, because the first responders have to, unless they can see a do not resuscitate order, they are obliged to start resuscitation. And it's a conversation that if you're conscious and you get to the hospital, that question is thrown at you. Well, I shouldn't say that. That question is presented. Do you want resuscitation? But if you collapse at home, your loved one with you, if there is someone, saying they don't want to be resuscitated does not matter. And I think that that's something that if you do want to consider, it might be worth a conversation with your doctor.
Thank you. The statement was about the importance of DNRs, and have one on your person, have something written, signed by a lawyer, family members. You can just call Bronson. Any local hospital can help direct you to get this. You can find the paperwork online, honestly. But if you do get a DNR, if you're serious about it, get it in writing, put it on your refrigerator, carry it in your wallet, in your purse. So always have the physical paper, the legal document on your person. So it's not enough just to believe what you can't just have someone say their DNR.
And it's different from those advanced directives. It's different.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Advanced directives can be very complicated, very baroque, for sure. Yes.
When you were talking about what were the worst obviously school shootings, where parents have to go in and identify their child that has been shot with semi-automatic.
Yeah. Yes.
Just for anyone that wants to know more about the Right to Die movement, or what some people call suicide, there is a network called the Final Exit Network, and their purpose is to assist people who are deemed mentally competent, who are, in pain or wanting that right. They do not assist anybody in that, but they send two people to be with them in their final moments. There's a podcast called Criminal, which covers all kinds of topics, and they do an interview with one of these people who you could maybe also consider a death one.
Thank you. Could you tell me the name of that organization again?
It's the Final Exit Network.
The Final Exit Network. Thank you. Yeah. And hospice is very good at helping people through those transitions as well. And sometimes, they're not, they know where people are going. So they've been very kind to my family and friends. So I'm sure yours as well. Yeah, Karen.
I guess I'd like to offer this, that as far as how I'd like to go. It's just, I just like to slide away, open the door and be gone. I don't care if I'm alone or around people or downtown on a walk, I just picture just sliding away into the next realm along my belief system. And I really do enjoy your presentation in the source of paradox, of having a lively dying, a beautiful death. It's not something in our culture that we really have cherished or practiced. And a lot like having children, we don't know what to do until they're here. And so we're not very prepared for our dying. How can we be until we get there? But I do enjoy this paradox of creating aesthetics or artwork, preparing your heart and mind for that inevitable destiny that we all will meet. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yes.
So I'm an art therapist and I used to work for hospice. So my art has been more focused on the grieving process since my husband died close to 7 years ago. And what I've done is used his ashes in lots of different art projects. So the first thing I did, I have a tattoo of its Japanese calligraphy for tiger. So my husband practiced a form of Tai Chi and Judo that was tiger-based karate. And so when he died, I had the tattoo made. And then I did a portrait of a tiger and I put the tattoo in the stripes of the tiger. And then I added the ashes to the paint. That was the first thing. And then I worked with a glass blower here in Kalamazoo, Mike Fortin, and